Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
We made this.
Welcome to We Are Starfleet, your Star Trek discussion podcast here on the We Made This network. Today, I'm joined by fellow Trekkie Kurt North from the X-Cast and Make It So, our Star Trek Picard pod. How are you today, Kurt? I'm
doing a lot better than what I have been in recent history, Ian. I've since July, I've been struggling with the after effects of having COVID. So I feel like this episode for me is a bit of a rehabilitation. I've done some episodes of podcasting since July. I did my Red Dwarf podcast for all 8 episodes right in the midst when I was ill, and I've done a few bits here and there, but it's been quite a struggle. But I'm getting there now, so I'm feeling the Trek vibe, and I need to get back onto the Make It So stuff and the book and things like that we need to cover over on that podcast. But it's nice to be back in the podcasting chair and back in the room where I normally record, because I've missed this, and it's good to start trying to get back onto an even keel with podcasting, because I have missed it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I'll be honest, I didn't realize you were still struggling quite a bit from your bout with COVID. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm very glad that you're back to getting into the swing of podcasting, and that this is one of the shows that you're doing that for. I'm honored. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, generally I've been okay, but it's I think it's the sheer amount of my lifestyle, work, family, everything else kind of is a priority. Yeah. And then this is the thing that has to give way, as much as I hate to say that, but it's one of those things where you're lying there thinking, I can't physically get up. And, I'm knackered now. And, the last thing I want to be doing is talking 3 hours on a Red Dwarf or Star Trek podcast or an X-File podcast when I'm feeling this hokey. So, but it is good to be back on, and hopefully, as I say, into 2023 is where I'm looking now, and hopefully this will be it. I've got lots going on as well. Star Trek Picard's coming back next year, of course.
Yeah,
so I need to be up firing all blazes, all phases on fire for that, definitely.
Yeah. How are you feeling about season 3 of Picard? Are you looking forward to it? Excited? Are you feeling like let's just get this over with? Where's your mind?
My mind is, I'm a bit apprehensive with this whole going back to the TNG lark. I actually, in some ways, like last season 2, I actually really enjoyed. Hide and Seek is probably one of my favorite Star Trek episodes for a long, long time in Picard. Yes, it is an uneven season and it is an uneven show. But I did like the fact that they are trying something new. There was things I would change about it and things that I would like to see done differently. But having said that, I've enjoyed the kind of the different aspect to it. My biggest fear is this is going to be a bit of a waving the TNG flag a bit too much. I'm hoping that's not the case, but either way, I'm always excited to see Picard on screen. So, yes, that's kind of where I'm at. So a little bit apprehensive with the style that they might be going for, but I might be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. I'm cautiously optimistic. I do suspect that they're going to lean pretty hard into TNG, although I don't think that's going to bother me as much as it might bother you. As long as whatever they do it well, and it feels like a cohesive vision. It felt like there was a lot of unevenness in both of the last 2 seasons in terms of where they wanted to go, the direction of the season, thematically, and just, episode to episode, there was such inconsistencies in quality. It felt like at times that it was hard to feel really fully invested in the stories that they were, I think, telling themselves they were telling.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll see. Who knows? I suspect if this season is pretty well received, and maybe even if it's not, that they will, this may be opening the door to bringing back some of these legacy characters and giving them their own spin-offs, or having them pop up in some of these other projects that they're working on. I think it's all possible.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's this kind of, as you say, the rumor mill's going around quite significantly about, because they're drawing Deep Space Nine stuff in and all that kind of thing as well, that that we might be in this era of Star Trek, which I will look forward to if they are going to stay around, the 2380s and around this 2400s and stuff.
Bring me the
Yeah.
Cisco.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what everyone's saying. And Cisco is back in a comic form, isn't he, at some point? So
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's something to look forward to. I have actually been enjoying the other media as well. I have in the past. I haven't been a massive fan of comic books and books. I'm currently, as part of now I am kind of getting back into the swing of things. I started to listen to the audiobook of Second Self, so that'll be good to talk about on Make It So when we get there. So yeah, the external media stuff I've actually really enjoyed, like the Seven and Raffi audiobooks and stuff. So that's all great, and I think Star Trek's in a really interesting place at the moment.
They are. It all seems like possibility, which is always an exciting thing. It can be frustrating when those possibilities feel like they are unrecognized or unrealized, or only get sort of partially realized and not in quite the way we were hoping. But
Yeah,
I still think it's very exciting that we have all of this sort of open land in front of us. There's always something new in the works, and they're trying a bunch of different things, and some of them are landing with audiences or with segments of audiences more solidly than others, but like that's okay. That's the nice thing when you're producing 5 Star Trek shows simultaneously. Like everyone's going to find something to enjoy.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, we are here to talk about Star Trek Prodigy, and I think this is your second time on talking about Prodigy. You were back with us on episode 7, First Contact, from the first half of season 1, and now we're talking about episode 16, Preludes. What did you think about this episode, and how are you feeling about Prodigy overall, since it's been a little while since we checked in with you?
Yeah, I think when I talked about the episode back in episode 7, I was really, really enjoying it, and I liked the terra firma episode, and I think the Dreamcatcher was before that. That 2-parter. I've really enjoyed the 2-episode season break as well with Moral Star. So yeah, overall, I think it's been a really strong season. Having said that, these past few weeks, and maybe the way that I'm feeling about it, Sleeping Borg I wasn't that fond of. I thought it didn't really do much for me in the way that the Borg are told in this, and it was a bit too easy, in my opinion, in the way that they dealt with that. And All the World's a Stage, this is when I get like tomatoes thrown at me, because it obviously relates to a TOS episode, which I've yet to see. So I don't have that context in All the World's a Stage, and I thought that was a little bit it's not really in my wheelhouse. It was a bit too campy for me. But that being said, the actual story, the likes of Crossroads, I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the interplay with the Federation being on the in that area, and them crossing paths with them and not really having the ability to speak out and say who they were and things like that. And Masquerade last week was a fantastic episode. So I think overall, if I was to give up to this episode 15, a rating out of 10, it would definitely be in the 8s. A few little hits and misses here and there, but some wonderful 2-parters. And I am really enjoying the story in regards to that. In regards to Preludes, when I started to watch this episode, I saw that there was about 50 people writing it, and that gave me instant red flags. I was like, okay. It's also called Preludes, so it kind of would give me an idea of what this might be about. And it is very much a holding pattern, a bit of decompression episode. And I think it's perfectly fine, but it doesn't really do anything. So It has an interesting, push on the actual story. It's a bit more of an exposition piece to some regards, and does that, tells the story fairly straightforwardly. It does just feel like it's a bit of not a filler, but it feels in some regard as like a filler episode, and something that I wouldn't necessarily go back to in a hurry.
Sure. I think I've probably been a little higher on the more recent episodes than it sounds like you have been. I've been pretty happy almost universally with every episode. At least everyone has been kind of above the line, so to speak, for me, which would be, kind of a 7.5 or higher. I haven't seen a single episode that has fallen flat for me so far. I'm really liking the show. I think it's a great way to get families involved in the Star Trek universe, to engage a younger audience, while also really holding true to a lot of the foundational principles of Trek philosophy and Trek storytelling, and also putting new spins on things that we are seeing in some of the other series as well. So it is very much rooted in kind of new Trek in, I think, a lot of the best ways. For example, we have a story this week, which is actually a series of stories, probably why there's a number of writers working on it. And you have not only backstory provided by a couple of different characters, but we finally find out what happens with the protostar and with this future civilization which collapses as a result of first contact with the Federation. And it's a really tantalizing idea, this notion that we've started to see more in newer iterations of Trek, the exploration of the unintended consequences of first contact, whether that's actually getting someone involved in the Federation, or you make first contact and decide, oh wow, this didn't go so well, we're getting out of here, bye. And newer iterations of Trek are really exploring more deeply the idea of, like, you have to recognize that your actions, even when well intended, and your principles, even when they come out of the best possible kind of desire to minimize your impact on others in a negative way, like sometimes you can intend the best things and still cause absolute chaos and devastation. And I thought that the idea of the Federation causing this kind of, or essentially sparking a civil war on this in this civilization, which is actually a little bit more advanced. We haven't really seen anything like that. We've seen turmoil caused when we contact less advanced civilizations for the first time, but I think this is the first time we've seen the consequences of making contact with an advanced civilization, maybe even more advanced than the Federation is, and then when that first contact directly leads to like civil conflict, civil war, brutal, like devastation, we just sort of hide behind the Prime Directive and say, well, can't get involved. Sorry, guys. It's an interesting notion to explore, and it's pretty sophisticated for a quote unquote kids show.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I was lucky enough, and it's strangely enough that the way that I've landed on this episode, to actually cover Lower Deck's trusted sources. So the fact that this is very similar, and I take what you're on board and what you're saying about the fact that the actual race themselves, or Diviner's race, is actually more experienced and know what the situation is, as opposed to what we've had with the Onara in trusted sources. But it's a very similar feel. It's like the I think what was it? It was Operation Flyby or Pass By or something like that in trusted sources. So yeah, and I think for me that is the biggest element of this episode. This episode was that central element of finding out the Diviner story. I don't know if I want to talk about that in a bit more depth, but definitely that was the interesting element of this episode. The other backstories that we've had before, not necessarily had before with certain characters. I mean, we've had obviously, the past couple of episodes has dealt with the history of augments and things like that as well, which is like a reveal. And we can go back to, I think it might have been Terra Firma or Dreamcatcher, where we saw the parents as things walking away. What's his name? Daj is walking away. Dal's walking away. And it'd be interesting to go back to that episode to see just how that works. Obviously, that was on their desires and their feelings, and might be mismemory and things like that. But the actual story, yes, there's we can call back to various different Star Trek episodes in the way that the Diviner story is told. But I that is the one thing I'm looking forward to discussing a bit more in depth with you, because that for me seems to be the central premise of this season. And it's taken a bout of a bit of decompression and a look back, and as it says, a prelude to the finale in the next 3 or 4 episodes. To really kind of like go, right, this is what the story is, and this is what we're going to do moving forward. And I think that's overall that element, that 3 or 4 minutes in this episode is really pertinent to that.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Absolutely. Yeah. The episode's called Preludes, and that's what we get a lot of in this episode. We find out a lot of origin stories. We learn, basically as they are waiting for the protostar engine to recharge after its repair, they are sharing stories about how they ended up where we found them at the beginning of the series. And we learned that Rok-Tahk was some sort of gladiatorial slave, and she's so sweet, and she because of her size and sort of seeming indestructibility, she was put in the sort of situation earlier on in the season that she didn't feel comfortable with, being the kind of security, being the heavy of the crew. And that really wasn't where she fit in. She's really she seems like she's a scientist at heart, which is great. That's full of Trek messaging. And she wants to pick up a microscope instead of a weapon. And I love that about her character. And it's so kind of fitting and tragic that her backstory involved gladiatorial combat, something for which she is not predisposed. And her appearance was prejudged by everyone she has encountered, really until now. Even the rest of the crew kind of prejudged her a bit earlier on in the season, and now she's really coming into her own. And I love that we've gotten, a kind of a completion, not of her arc, because she's still on her journey, but now that we've seen where she came from and where she is, it's that much more meaningful. And I love that segment.
Yeah, and I think just while you were talking then, and giving myself a little bit of time to pass on the episode as a whole, what's interesting with Rock's little story here and throughout this episode, actually, because a lot of it deals with communication, because Rock's communication with the person that she's fighting against is nonverbal. So the fact that we've got two characters who don't really understand each other, it's something that we've had before in likes of Darmok, for example, but you don't really understand each other, but they come to have an understanding within each other. And even when we have the cute scene where, you know, it becomes funny, and then she realizes that she can do something different and doesn't have to be this monster. And that in itself, that communication affects what happens to her. And I think that's really interesting that they went down that route, because they could have easily had those two talking to each other, but they didn't. They had it more of an aspect of, this is what happens when you can, like, sort of almost a non-violent, sort of response, a protest in what she's been asked to do, has actually got her moved out of the position that she was in. But also this communication between the two of them, who are both effectively slaves and are having this gladiatorial, stage show. And I suppose you look back to episodes for earlier in the season, when they were talking on our world's a stage, things like that. So there's a lot of themes that kind of permeate through. And we'll get to talk about Jake and Pog's story later, but that is very much about communication as well. So I think that there's a bit going on here, especially, you think about, as I say, going back to the main story, that the how the Federation have dealt with the communication with this new race, and how has that affected people, which we'll get into more depth on. But I think just when you were talking there, that just came into my mind, just how much that communication is a real interesting tool that they use in this episode.
Yeah, and in the series overall, especially these last couple of episodes, now that they have interacted with Janeway, like, they cannot communicate with Janeway because it will kill Janeway and every other Federation ship that the Protostar encounters. Like, the design, the diabolical design of this weapon, renders them unable to communicate, renders them unable to use the most important tool that we have to resolve conflict.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's something to look out for in the next few episodes as well, to see if that is something that they're going to have to get along with. Because at the end of the day, Janeway has to speak to them in some guise, and that's the difficulty that they're going to have. And as I say, for me in this episode, that I think the communication aspect is quite key.
Yeah. And we don't just learn Rok-Tahk's background, but like you mentioned, we learn Jank and Pog's background. We also learn Zero's background. Zero, is a Medusan. We're not really used to seeing them kind of in their element on their own, as they're these sort of non-corporeal aliens. But we learned that essentially it looked like was it the Kazon? Someone was hunting. The Kazon were hunting for a Medusan to sell, and unfortunately, Zero's number was up and was captured while on a planet on a mission, or just exploring and enjoying himself, herself, themselves, and they were captured by the Kazon and sold into the situation where they were when we found them at the beginning of the season. And not much to this backstory. It's just a little bit more context. It's not really, to me, it didn't seem to have the same kind of weight emotionally that the Rok-Tahk and the Jank and Pog story even did. But I think that it's still good to have the full story now of this is where you were among your own kind, minding your own business, doing your own thing, being peaceful, and then you were captured and sold into slavery. Like, that is a tale as old as time, unfortunately. It was fine. It worked. I was glad to have the story. It probably was the least impactful of these backstories that we got this week.
Yeah, I think the most impactful element was the creature that got eaten, because I hate things like that. Whenever like a cute creature or a tiger in Walking Dead state or something like that comes on screen that you end up like sort of falling in love with, say for example the little thing on Insurrection. I always had a bit of empathy for them, and to see it just being ripped out of there, and I was like, oh, that was probably the most emotional I got throughout the episode. Sure. Having said that, though, also with Zero is the reason why Zero ended up in that situation is a very Star Trek thing to do as well, because exploring and investigating and curious about that life form. So
Yeah.
I did like that. I did like that they actually used that element to, that was what got Zero into trouble. But with great risk comes great reward on occasions, and hopefully that's what Zero will get here. A wonderful reward for just that bit of empathy and that bit of exploration, and eventually we'll find, as they will say, about the fact it's it's all about what happened. It's about what happens in the future, and the team that they've now got.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, all of them are gaining better understandings of one another through these episodes, through telling the stories that we get in this episode. And, it's all working towards continuing to forge these, if they weren't already, this crew into a more cohesive whole. Like, I think they all have crossed that threshold of not being certain if they can really trust or rely on each other. They're pretty much all 100% on board with one another and with being a part of the team and with working each other. But it's nice to have that like last little bit of the puzzle fitting into place in our understandings of these characters and where they've come from.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that.
Well, the last kind of personal story that we get the background of is Jankum's story, and I thought this was a pretty funny story and touching, which is appropriate for his character and also the show as a whole. But yeah, we learned that Jankum basically was woken up out of cryo sleep, for some reason why they picked the trainee instead of one of the more experienced engineers, who knows. And he basically is assigned to a never-ending series of problems to fix on the ship. That was probably the funniest part of the episode for me, was this little robot who woke him up kept saying, "Oops, something terrible. Oops, oops, warp core breach. Oops."
Yeah, and what's your name? What's your name? What's your name?
Yeah, just keep he keeps saving the ship and everyone on board while they sleep, and the robot can't remember his name. And it's just funny, a little bit tragic, touching. I really liked this backstory for Jankum.
Yeah, and just how again, that they would have survived with 29 rather than 30 members, and he's the one that decides, well, it's time for me to jump ship, and again, going back to the Zero story, that is a something that he will live with, and actually it'll be make him better. Part of me thinks that, are we getting also some kind of foreshadowing into what we may get in the future as well with this, that we're seeing these traits in people, and whether or not these traits actually will end up being part of the story, we don't know. But I do think that it is interesting that they've gone down that route, and I think Prodigy as a whole has done this, I think, and as much as I not necessarily like that Borg episode, it introduces the Borg in the world, and even the World's a Stage is not an episode I particularly enjoyed, even though I'd still say they were good. It's introducing the TOS stuff. This is obviously introducing some of the ideas of, like, when Data's had to look after something and everyone's had to be put into stasis, or when 7 and 9 had to do it. There's story elements that have been involved in Star Trek over the generations that that do actually have resonance, and I think that is the one good thing that Prodigy is doing. If you were to give this one season a look and hadn't ever seen any Star Trek at all, and you went through the rest of the Star Trek, you would see these kind of stories that emanate. Now, some people might turn around and say, "Oh, we've seen this story before," but that's not the case for Prodigy. I think it's very much a case of, we need to be a broad church and to bring these elements in to enable new viewers to understand what Star Trek is, and I think that it's doing a marvelous job of that. And the Jacob Pog thing is definitely the fact that he is doing this for the team. I just have this feeling there might be a bit of foreshadowing involved.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Yeah, yeah. He's so fixated on the idea of fixing. He's the sort of last thing he says before getting captured by the Kazon after he escapes his ship is Jankum fixed it. He's so proud, as he should be, of his ability to solve problems, fix pretty much anything. And I think that's one of his most lovable qualities. And the fact that he doesn't hesitate for a moment to be like, oh, well, it's me, I have to leave, and no one's ever going to recognize the sacrifice that I made. But like, it's obvious what I have to do. I'm just going to do it. That's how I fix the problem. I think that we'll see. I think you're right. I think we'll see that trait continue to be explored, and probably create some narrative tension at some point. Is Jankum going to be in his position where he's going to choose to sacrifice himself to save everyone else? And given the kind of show this is, that's probably not going to come to pass, like in terms of him actually needing to sacrifice himself or actually dying. But I still think that impulse is going to be there, and it's intrinsic to who he is as a character, his desire to fix problems, and like even at the detriment of himself. Like, he is simultaneously very into himself and his abilities, and also is not hesitant to say, oh, well, if the thing that needs to be done is for me to sacrifice myself or to put myself through a lot of discomfort in order to fix the problem, then I'll do that without hesitation. And that makes him a member of Starfleet, whether or not he realizes it.
Yeah, and I think the very nature, as I say, with the sacrificial, I know in normal Star Trek you'd be saying, oh, well, they might sacrifice themselves to do X, Y, and Z, or even normal TV shows. It might necessarily be that he gets himself captured for some reason to let the other team disappear or things like that. So there's other ways that you can go about using that element of the self-sacrifice for himself for the betterment of others. And they could use that way, which I think would be an interesting story to take. And I think that just showing that, and what I do like about the scene towards the end, is saying about him, the sacrifices that he has, in that he was saying, make them sure they remember the name, Jacob Morgan. It's like, sorry, what's your name? It's just like the robot, oh my God, okay, no one's going to know, but he's trying, bless him. He's trying to make a name for himself. He's just not capable. And again, the people will know his name if he does make a sacrifice by the end of the season. Yeah,
for sure. And his story moved me and was very funny. I think Jason Mantzoukas continues to do a great job with this character. And honestly, I feel like all of these characters have done a really good job of becoming really distinct. It's still early in this series. We're only in episode 16 overall, and these are short episodes. We don't get a lot of time with these characters, but they've already done, I think, such a really good job of distinct characterization between all of them. They all come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and have not always seen eye to eye, and don't always approach the problems that they encounter with the same solutions or the same attitudes. But I think that's one of the things that makes the show so unique. You've got this full, very alien cast. It's a very, ironically, in an animated show, you've got, at least visually, your most diverse Star Trek cast that we've ever seen. And I just love that about the show. I don't really have a point other than, this is a thing I've noticed about the show. It's really cool and I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the thing with the 20 minutes, I mean, I've been struggling to keep up with a lot of things going on at the moment, but when you asked me to come on the show, I was like, right, I need to catch up. I'm a few episodes behind. And the fact they are 20 minutes, to watch them all in a quick succession has its pluses and minuses. I've talked about this on other TV shows before where, do I want them all as a binge or do I enjoy them week to week? And week to week, you can analyze them more and take more in as a sponge. Whereas like seeing them in a quick succession, you're seeing the story progress. And that's what I've really enjoyed about just having the last few episodes, watching them in quick succession, because you do get that story quite quickly. And that's the strength for me, that the diversity of a story, the diversity of the crew, and the way they are going about, having to put these roadblocks up, because I'm very surprised they got to the Federation as quickly as they have done. But to have these roadblocks, using the neutral zone as a roadblock is a good way of actually doing that and having that presentation. And also behind the scenes, that we know what happens in the near future with Romulus and the Romulan Empire and the supernova and all that type of thing that's happening around there, which obviously struggles to place where this exactly is. But to have the neutral zone as that area is a good storytelling device, that you can still have these Federation adventures with this ragtail crew without having the Starfleet shackles put on them just yet. And yeah, as you say, that the diversity of the stories that they can tell, and this is a perfect example, because you are looking at 3 or 4 different stories of characters that we have dealt with in the past, but we've been very much focused on Gwen and Dal, and it's prudent that we actually do have some backstories for the others, because we need to know a little bit more about them. We do get to hear and see a lot of the stuff that they may have done in the past, and we do feel for them, like Rock in when she was in the mess hall, for example. But to see these kind of backstories, I think is a good way of telling it. And as I say with this episode, it's not necessarily a throwaway episode, because there's a lot of important things in it. But the main central story is only going to take up 3 or 4 minutes, and to develop the other characters in this way on a 20-minute episode of television, this is probably the most efficient way of doing it. And so I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad episode by any stretch of the imagination. That's not what I'm saying. But I do feel that this is circumstantial in the way that they have to do it, because then they've got the preludes out the way, and then you can move the story on. And I think it's a very accomplished episode because of that.
Yeah. Speaking of the sort of central core story, the big thing which we alluded to earlier that we learned this week is the backstory of the protostar. At least to an extent, we find out what happened to it, how it got into the place where we found it at the beginning of the season, where, or more specifically when, Chakotay is now. And yeah, I don't know about you. I wasn't necessarily expecting to get all of this information in this episode over the course of just a few minutes.
Yeah. It was, as I say, it was quite exposition heavy, but at the end of the day, it does it in a way that this is the story, okay, and you've had some clues, we've had some issues here, but you've also got to remember the type of show it is. And the exposition works really well, and
it does.
The way that they've done this, with having the Divine and not really knowing what's happening, and then him realizing it with us, I think is quite good. And as you say, it's really good because of the type of show that this is. That it does have a really kind of tight, logistical way of doing it, and it falls on some Star Trek tropes. But I do like the way that they've pushed it, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that one of the things that the show is doing, even though it is a bit of an exposition dump, is it's something that all the fans watching the show have been wondering. So it's almost like it's more like releasing a pressure valve than it is dumping a bunch of new information on us, because it's been building this tension of like, man, like what happened? How did that get there? How did where's Chakotay? And now we we don't have to worry as much about those answers. We have a bunch of answers, and we have a couple of new questions and problems for our characters to solve. Like Janeway is in trouble. And by the way, I don't know about you, but I've been really enjoying the balance that they've struck in the second half of this season with, giving us a little bit of Janeway. It's moving the overall big picture story forward, and it's just enough that it's not feeling like the show is getting lost in the nostalgia of, oh, we can have adventures with these characters we love again. It's still really focusing on, like this episode, it was 80% focused on the new characters that we're focused on in the show, and getting to know each of them a little bit better and having them continue to grow even closer. And then we got 3 minutes of like really, really, really important stuff going on in like Janeway's storyline over here.
Yeah.
I like the balance that they're striking, and this week, those few minutes were dedicated to exploring, what happened with Protostar, what happened on Solemn. We learn, we had it explained to us a little bit earlier in the season, but we were reintroduced to the idea, and it's expanded on the idea that at some point in the future, the Federation comes to this planet. And in coming to this planet, there's apparently a fundamental disagreement about what the way forward should be. Should we join this Federation? Should we continue to do our own thing? I hope that we get a little bit more exploration of kind of exactly what happened in the aftermath of this first contact, because it's left kind of vague. Basically, it's the Federation made first contact with this advanced civilization. This advanced civilization couldn't agree on what to do about that, and somehow that led to a brutal, bloody civil war. And when they turned back to the Federation and said, essentially, "Hey, look what you did here. Please help," the Federation, hid behind the Prime Directive, said that it wasn't going to take sides, and just let this civilization tear itself apart.
Yeah.
And that's a very different kind of Federation than the one that we are used to and are, kind of thinking of when we think of the values that the Federation puts forward. But, it is also conceivable that, oh yeah, like that's a potential downside of having this hard, fast, like Prime Directive like rule of like not getting of non-interference, of not getting involved in the business of other civilizations, especially if they aren't already members of the Federation, and they can't join the Federation until they resolve their own civil conflicts. That's something we've seen brought up a couple of times. Like in Next Generation, we have potential Federation member states that like need to tend to their own backyards before they can join the Federation. That's sort of the message that they get at the end of those episodes. And now we have a civilization which is descending into civil conflict because of that first contact with the Federation, and the Federation is stepping back and saying, "Not our problem."
Yeah. And it's interesting in the world in which we live in right now. As a British person, the word Brexit comes into mind, but you've only got to look at like what's happening with the, the Ukrainian war and things like that, which is quite a heavy subjects with, but they all kind of filter through to shows like this. And, and I think especially given that the Brexit thing came to mind because, it was 52%, it was right down the middle. On the voting that side of things, that you've got really a really like evolved structure in British politics over the years, and there was not to the point of civil war, but there was obviously there's a big debate about how Brexit came about and what happened, and should we have stayed in the EU, should we not have stayed in the EU, and then you've got obviously like stuff like what's happening in Ukraine and things. And and it unfortunately it does make for interesting debates and stories and things. And this for me, as you said earlier in the episode, the fact that it has turned around to this culture that is already developed. And, it isn't a big, godlike existence coming down and going, we know better. We're a utopia. Come and join us. This was, come and join us. Oh, but why would we want to join you? And I do like that. That's part of this story element, because it does add a bit of depth to the story. And I always enjoy something with that world builds in that way. And, the difference with trusted sources compared to this episode is that, as you say, I would hope that we actually delve into a little bit more into this story, and hopefully it is done succinctly, that we do kind of have that little bit of debate about what happened during that. What was the Federation's involvement? How did the government collapse? And they've had things like this in the Orville as well. Recently, they've had stories similar to this in the Orville, and I think that's really, really fascinating that we are able to have these reflections in TV shows, and Prodigy is no different. What I like about this storytelling element as well, yes, there is first contact, and there is like the wormhole aspect and time travel, and you can look at Star Trek 2009 and all that kind of thing. What I particularly like, I mean, even Deep Space Nine actually, but what I particularly liked about this one was the the scientists that got involved with this and saying, right, okay, we need to change the past. We need to stop first contact as such. There was 1% chance, and they actually sent 100 ships. And I just thought that was a really neat idea. I actually kind of chuckled to myself, went, that's a scientist's way out of the equation, actually bring in some, lower the odds by doing this. And I thought it was a really interesting way of doing it. And actually having that aspect, I think really worked. Just a quick question for myself is, obviously Gwen is something that happened. Now the ensign, I can't remember her name, as Abagine or something like that. I can't quite remember what her name was. She said that it was kind of out of what the Order would do, but because he's been there for 20 years, that they can see why. And I thought that was an interesting quote that she said.
Yeah. I'm curious to learn more about this Order, their social structure. Like it's clear that there is still a lot more to learn about the way this civilization operates, and I'm curious to learn that. And I think that, to your point earlier about hoping we get a little bit more exploration of exactly what happened after this disastrous first contact. I think that some of that will come out of what I presume are going to be conversations that are going to be had with Janeway now that she's been captured by these folks. They gave her the good old Star Trek classic karate chop to the neck knockout, and now she's going to be in their captive. She's going to be their captive for at least an episode, I'm guessing, and out of that captivity, I think will emerge conversations that will continue to give us a more full picture of what happened and when it happened. How far in the future are we talking? Like how far in the future is Chakotay presumably still trapped? Because that's the other thing we learn, is that the way the Protostar got wrapped up into all of this is that it basically fell or created, we're not really sure, at some sort of temporal anomaly that catapulted it to the future where this civilization on Solemn had basically collapsed or was on the verge of collapsing. And, rather than agree to be, I guess, turned against the Federation, Chakotay and crew set the Protostar to kind of automatically, without the crew without any living crew being on board, to go back through the anomaly. That's presumably where it ends up, going through and crashing onto I don't remember where they are, the place where they start the season.
Yeah.
And Chakotay is presumably just trapped on this planet, the far future Solemn. We don't know quite how far in the future, but yeah, it's an interesting turn. It makes all of this sort of setup for the season, for the series, really make sense. Everything's kind of clicking into place now. questions are being answered. And I appreciate that, because it's not like there aren't more questions to be answered. It's just that we now aren't getting this mystery dragged on and on and on.
Yeah, it's succinct, and as I say, it's you've got the episode's called Preludes, so the fact that we've got pretty much all the information that we need, the rest will be, as you say, like a debate on the information that we've already got and the conclusion to that, you would think. So, yeah, I think it does a really good job of actually, as I say, decompressing the season up to this point and, giving us a bit of time to breathe. I always like those episodes as well in that regards, that you do get kind of a feeling of that decompression of like, right, okay, we're just stopping for a second. We're just going to stop and take stock, and then we're going to head into the back end of the season. I think that works really well. And all the chess pieces are kind of in their place now, and it's what they do with those chess pieces and what moves they make. So yeah, I think it's been really done really well. And I think as a season of Star Trek, as a first season of Star Trek, it's definitely probably the best first season of Star Trek that there has been, really.
Yeah, I think I agree. I really thought that as far as live action goes, I thought Strange New Worlds had a very strong first season. I don't recall how you enjoyed that show, but I quite enjoyed it a bit. And I think that there are some, obviously first season of TOS is a classic, but generally speaking, like Next Gen took a while to find its feet. I think the first season of Deep Space Nine has a few episodes that are really, really great, but I still think that show was taking a little bit of time to find its feet. Voyager, of course, took a fair amount of time to find its feet. First season of Enterprise is okay. It's not that great, but yeah, this first season of this show, it seems like, and I think I said this the last time I was on here, but one of the things that I really like about this show, and it applies to Lower Decks too, is that it's clear that the creators knew exactly the kind of show that they wanted to make, and were just allowed to make it, and just not, I think they've by and large knocked it out of the park, especially as, like you were saying, a first season of a Star Trek series goes. This season has been really fantastic by those standards.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally.
All right. Do you have any last thoughts about this week's episode or Prodigy overall that you want to share?
No, I don't think so. As I say, I think I'll be just repeating myself with I think you need this episode. It feels like an end of a season, maybe, before you get into the big story at the end. So, I think that's the main thing. I've thoroughly enjoyed the show as a whole. And as I say, I don't want people to get the misconception that I didn't like the whole season. There's just elements which are not in my particular wheelhouse that I still enjoyed, but not necessarily, think are outstanding. But yeah, overall, I think it's going to be a really, really good end to this season. I'm really hopeful that, and I'll probably, I'll be on there as soon as I can watching those episodes, rather than actually trying to catch up, because I'm now invested in the story. So yeah, I think it's done its job by coming onto this episode today. But yeah, other than that, no, nothing really else to go on. Just I'm really, really enjoying the season.
Excellent. Do you have any socials or other projects that you want to plug? I know we mentioned a couple of your other podcasts up top, but if you want to remind folks.
Yeah, so as I say, Star Trek Make It So podcast will be coming back hopefully before Christmas. We'll be talking about the Second Self book, and we'll be talking about the Blu-ray of Star Trek Picard Season 2, which is right in my hand as we speak. The Red Dwarf podcast is currently on a slight hiatus. We've done Red Dwarf 7, and it's doing a couple of Christmas specials and the like. And we'll be returning for the X-Cast, which is the X-Files podcast, in next year for season 9. So we're getting to the end of the X-Cast at that point. So we've got 2 more seasons to go after that. But best place to find me is on Twitter at rmuldrake. It's at RMULDRAKE. And if Twitter has gone, then find me on Linktree, which is on Linktree, and you can / rmuldrake as well. So RMULDRAKE, and you'll find all the things I'm up to at the moment. As I say, I've been a bit quiet, but January, February, March, there's loads going on. Red Dwarf, X-Files, Star Trek, Yellow Jackets, just everything's happening. So keep an eye on me. I will be back with a vengeance come March.
Great. Well, thanks for all that. You can't really find me on socials, but you can find We Are Starfleet and We Made This on Twitter for now, I guess. We'll see how that goes. We will, of course, let everyone know if and when our socials change. But you can find We Made This and We Are Starfleet both on Twitter at those. And thanks for joining us for another week. Star Trek Prodigy is not all we're discussing on the We Made This network, so stay tuned for a taste of what you might have missed out on in just a moment.
Are you a fan of the Marvel Universe?
Can you tell your Kang from your Doctor Doom?
Well, if so, boy, do we have a podcast for you.
Podcast 616 is the We Made This Network's long-running Marvel podcast, and it's under new management.
We're your hosts, Ashley Thomas
and Hugh McStay.
And together, we are going to lead you every step of the way through the Marvel Cinematic Universe's upcoming multiverse saga.
Everything from She-Hulk to Avengers Secret Wars will be covered on the podcast in the kind of detail that would make a Wikipedia article blush.
We're going to have some detours into the wider Marvel world where we'll look at non-MCU projects dating all the way back to Marvel's origins in the groovy, funky 60s, and all the way up to the birth of the greatest franchise in cinema history.
And we'll be joined on our adventure by a roll call of guests so impressively knowledgeable that they'll make the Avengers themselves look clueless by comparison.
So if you like your opinions sharper than Wolverine's claws,
or takes hotter than the Human Torch's underpants,
then get Podcast 616 in your ears as a matter of urgency.
You'll love it 3000.
Podcast 616.
Disassemble.